Oftentimes we'll get cane or a gouge that's a little weaker than other pieces. Softer cane, you have to approach a little differently. And I'll show you some ways which really help working with this kind of cane or gouge. So I've already checked to see if it was soft, and it is fairly soft, so we're going to go with it. And this is one of the things that, as reed makers, we get into trouble with the difference. And there are some books out there on reed making, and there's a couple I can think of that we use quite a bit, but they're very different reeds. And they're reeds made with very different gouges. You have one camp, you have people that really prefer strong setup, and you have another camp where people don't. I'm kind of in the middle. I prefer a weaker gouge because to me it sounds better. And with stronger gouges, sometimes you have to scrape a portion of the sound out of it, or quality of the sound, in order to get it to function. But in any case, either one you can make reeds with. The trouble that people get into is when they try to make a weak reed with a strong setup, or a strong reed with a weak setup, because you can't do that. It doesn't work. It won't function. Granted, there are some pieces of cane that will kind of throw you for a loop. They'll have a little bit of strength in them, or they'll have a little bit of weakness, and that's where you want to go for the sound of the reed. How does it sound? How does it play? What's it feel like? Does it quack like a duck, or does it honk like a goose? And then you approach the reed depending on how it reacts that way. But with this one, we're going to see. I think it's fairly weak. We'll find out. I'm not really going to know until I start playing it. I haven't taken a lot off the reed, and you can see that there's, it's still there's some wood on there, and it's vibrating quite a bit. This is definitely a weaker piece of cane. Let's see, we'll scrape the channels here a little bit, and you'll see what I mean. It should just rattle a lot. Once I do that, I'm going to try to get rid of the nick. And I haven't gone too far with the tip, but you can see the cane is the grain is a bit wide, and doesn't look very compact. It looks stringy. So it's not going to be very strong, I don't think. Yeah, this is very weak piece of cane. We'll try to continue on with it. Alright, so I'm going to clip and see if we get it to a C. Yeah, that's not gonna... It's not gonna want to go. Not quite, but almost. And so you can tell that, we've clipped quite a bit off of it, and yeah, it's at 71, and it's barely hanging on. So it doesn't have a lot of strength. So because of that, this is how we're going to approach the reed. I will scrape the back of it, but lightly. I'm not going to put anything into that. I'll just remove some cane, because quite honestly, this reed would work without scraping out of the back. Now, what I'm going to do is thin the front of the tip with this one. We're going to work our way back. Now, oftentimes I think people would just throw this out, right? You'd try to get it to crow's C, and it wouldn't. And then you'd be like, okay, well, we're just going to toss it. But sometimes these reeds particularly if you need something that works. You can make them work. It's just you have to understand the approach. And that if this were a strong piece of cane, I wouldn't be scraping the tip like this. I'd stay away from it. I'd get it thin enough, but not really go at it. In doing this, you may take a little piece of the end off, and you won't have to worry too much about that, because we will clip it, and that'll clean it up. It'll also make it a lot more resistant too by doing that. When I scrape the left side, I don't do very well. Kind of. But you can see the cane that it comes off. It's really what I've done is approach the reed from the tip, the very end, working back. Yeah, it's not even strong enough to close itself. So that's what we have. It's a little more blended. You can see the color. It's very lighter at the end, and then it gets a little more wood. You can see the color changes a bit. And that's really a classic example of a weaker gouge. It's more blended. So let's clip it and see what we got. Try to get it to a C. Doesn't want to go. You can tell it's fighting it. Almost there. I know some people like to work with numbers, you know, like the tip should be X amount long and the heart should be 5 millimeters and the back should be this and that and the other thing. When you're working with a weaker piece of cane, just know that the tip is going to be shorter. And when you look at pictures of reeds of the older generation players, their tips are much shorter because it's a weaker gouge and it's a thinner tip. Not quite there. We're going to try to make something out of this, even though it's very, very weak. I will continue to do a little bit more. By just thinning the corners. And sometimes this will even bring the pitch up on the reed. If it gets extreme, you know, sometimes you really have to thin the very tip, which I would never do with a stronger gouge. I would never go at the very end of the tip, because then it wouldn't have the strength to make the rest of the reed vibrate. Whereas this is so weak, we kind of have to artificially put strength in the reed by doing this. And it can be done. It really can. If you have something that's just incredibly weak, you can make the tip very thin, and that will balance the reed. It'll be a different animal, but it will work. Yeah, it's very thin. I'm going to clip it, and I think we'll get it there pretty close. Yeah. All right, so this is what we have, and the reed plays, but it's really not going to be that great. I know there's pieces of it missing, but you can see where I made the very tip is very thin. It's almost like there are two tips. It's very thin at the end, and it has to be like that in order for the reed to be strong enough, you know, for the tip to interact with the rest of the reed. This is just an example of what to do with very, very weak cane or weak gouges, or, you know, if you have trouble with sagging pitch and that sort of thing, you really have to go after the tip of the reed in this case. You'll have little fragmentations, right? You can actually, it'll chip away at the very tip of the reed. It will start to fray. And these are the extremes you have to do in order to get the reed to work, to function. And you can do that. I've known players that made reeds like that, and they would fray the tip because the gouge was so, the cane was so soft that it would fix the reed. I know, it's hard to believe. What it does is it imparts a kind of strength to the reed, bizarrely, creates a resistance. These are extreme measures, but I just wanted to show you, you know, what it takes to get something that's very, very weak to play into function. If I were to make this like other reeds that were strong setups, it would never work. All right, so I hope that gives you some insight as to the difference between weak setups and strong setups, and what's required to make something weak function.